Hi there. I'll start with a fair warning because this is a long video, but I wanted to include all of the test footage, including the processes that weren't relevant to the final outcome. So if you're here for a quick fix, I'd suggest just watching the first 2.5 minutes and the last 3.5 minutes, and in those 6 minutes you'll get to know everything you need to know. Now, of course, the question on everybody's mind is how strong is the epoxy? So, you can't see through a video here of how hard it feels under my finger. You have no idea what it felt like trying to push a drill through it. So I'm going to learn with you. And basically, when I did my block with the epoxy, I bought a couple of these mint sauce bottles. I mixed up the epoxy. I poured it into the first mint sauce bottle, and while I started applying that in the engine, a mate of mine poured the remaining epoxy into this second mint sauce bottle, I should say, and with the intention then that if I ran out of the first bottle, I pick up the second bottle and away I go. So this epoxy was made in the same batch as that epoxy and was poured into this container the same time that epoxy was put into the block. This was left on the table next to the block the whole time it was curing. So yeah, I'm confident that what is in this bottle is the same as what's in my block. I'll note that we picked this bottle up a few times over the hour or two after pouring it, and this remained warm for a long time. So there is like a chemical reaction going on that this actually got physically noticeably warm to touch and pick up as it was curing. So there is a definite chemical reaction going on as the epoxy cures. So I've got this sample. This is hard, but we're going to find out how hard. I've also got, a sample of aluminium. I wish I had a piece of this aluminium bright that was the same sort of diameter as that, but I don't, so we're going to have to make do. We're going to cut a piece of epoxy off. So from here, I'm going to cut down about 19 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch and cut let's say a disc off, a little disc off of there, because that's how thick the epoxy is in my block there. A bit hard to see the way the light is, but that's how thick it is there. It's about 3/4 of an inch. So we'll cut a 3/4 inch disc off the top of this. And the process of cutting it, we're going to check how well it cuts and whether it bluntens these blades. And I suspect it might, because when I made that hole there and started filing it, it actually damaged my file. So might be able to see that from about my finger onwards that way. Just get a marker. That's in the video, but it's very obvious to me that basically this file I've had for years. I've used it on metal, aluminium, all sorts of materials, and it was very consistent down the length of it. You actually see the bottom end there maybe that it's actually blunted the file, just filing it a short amount of time. I turned it over and it started blunting the other side. You can sort of see the line here where the file is now blunt. So this material blunts files. It also blunts drill bits. I went through a number of drill bits, drilling the holes in it and trying to figure out the best way of doing it. I did find generally starting with smaller holes and then working the size up meant I did seem to do less damage to the drill bits. So yeah, I do know that it does seem like a very tough product, but we'll go one step further. We've got a big hammer here. We'll cut that disc off, we'll belt it with a hammer, we'll cut some aluminium off, we'll belt that. We'll see how well they deform or change or break or whatever compared to each other, because this is basically the material that an engine machine shop would use to cut, that's the same sort of aluminium they're going to use to do a closed deck using an aluminium insert. So we'll check the strength of them. Got some chisels. We'll try belting it with a chisel as well, and some center punches. And I've also got a pot here because I just want to show of course everybody's concerned that in here this is 100 degrees Celsius or whatever with the coolant, that is the stuff going to melt or change, will its properties change as the engine heats up. So we'll put some in some boiling water, we'll get it up to 100 degrees and then maybe try hitting it again and see whether it dissolves in hot water over time, just to prove that it's not water soluble. And then right at the end, maybe we'll grab this flamethrower and we'll see, you know, how much flame we can apply to it or heat we can apply to it before it starts either melting or catches on fire. I don't know what it's going to do, but let's learn together. Now, regarding the surface finish of the epoxy in my block here, I need to point out that it probably looks different, or it definitely looks different than the bright blue when I first poured it, and it probably looks different to the footage or pictures of other people's epoxy in their blocks. And I can explain why that might be the case. After I poured it, I grabbed the heat gun and I started waving the heat gun over it, and with the intention of bringing the bubbles to the surface and creating a nice finish on top. But while I was doing that, the heat gun was actually sort of blowing the epoxy or moving it. I could see the surface sort of rippling slightly, or let's just say deforming slightly under the heat gun. And I was concerned that it might set that way, that I might end up with an undulating surface if it set that way. In hindsight, I could have kept the heat gun on it for longer. So basically, I only used the heat gun for long enough to bring all the bubbles to the surface and not to actually like smooth the surface over. So you can see there, if I zoom in, it's probably a good section there where you can see around that hole. You can see all the little dimple marks where there's bubbles that have been on the surface that have popped, and there's that sort of white, what appears to be like a white film. It's not a film, it's just bubbles that are just under the surface, like just about to rise up and pop. But where I've cut through, I can see I don't have, you know, any bubbles inside of it. So they did rise and come out, but I didn't probably hold the heat gun on it long enough. So yeah, maybe in hindsight I could have, but hey, it's inside the engine. I'm confident it hasn't changed the integrity, the structural integrity of the epoxy. So just cut that out, and this is the first time I'm seeing it, and so now you can see more maybe the brilliant blue of it. And the surface looks similar to mine. It's got a few, some bigger bubbles because this didn't have the heat gun applied to it for that short amount of time. But yeah, it's not like there's bubbles all the way through it. Using verniers, we've measured a depth of about 17 millimeters, which is 0.669 of an inch, and so that's from this surface here. So there's what's called a meniscus that forms, like a rolled edge on the top. It's also formed on here. So it's 17 millimeters from the flat surface here down to the underside there. I've measured a couple other holes as good as I can, and yeah, it seems to be pretty consistent all the way along. I know I was very careful with the sugar application. I spent a lot of time getting that as level as I could, 19 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch down. So the 17 mil thickness makes sense because there's sort of a mil or two of meniscus forming up against the edge of the gallery there. So I've taken a little bit of that meniscus edge off, just rubbing it against the concrete, and but it's still on there. And then I've measured down here. Where are we? 18 millimeters is where I've made a mark here. I'll use this tool here to run that mark, or continue that mark all the way around to give me a cutting guide before I cut it. Alright, so we've got a mark all the way around at 18 millimeters from the top, or about 17 millimeters down from this main surface. Got a new blade on the hacksaw. I'll be honest, it feels a bit easier to cut than aluminium, at least so far, but I almost feel like the blade's getting blunt already. Okay, I've got a consistent cut all the way around. Now I'll get stuck into cutting it all the way through. So that's the end of the blade where I haven't done any cutting, and see as I move up it just gets blunter and blunter and blunter. So yeah, this stuff, I haven't even finished cutting halfway through yet, but it's blunted the first blade. I'll keep going a bit and hopefully I'll get through it after some time. That first blade was completely blunt, so I swapped back to the old blade that was on the hacksaw just to finish it off, and it's now removed. Lots of fine dust in the cutting process. Yeah, this piece probably very well represents what's in my engine. It's got the little bubbles and that surface sort of on top, and it's the same thickness as the epoxy in my block. Now onto the aluminium. Now, as I understand, for the inserts for a closed deck with aluminium, it's 1/2 inch they use, 12 to 13 millimeters. So got 12.5 millimeters there, or 0.495, 1/2 an inch. Measured down from that end. I've just run this around it. We're now going to put a fresh, so there's the blunt blade from the epoxy. We'll put a fresh blade on and cut through this piece and then assess the blade. I understand this is obviously a lot smaller, but honestly that blade went blunt very, very fast. So we'll see what the blade looks like after cutting through this smaller piece. Obviously the aluminium is a lot less material to cut through, but still I noted that all the way through the blade was performing the same. I'll try and zoom in on it there. You can still see it's got nice sharp teeth on it. There's a few blunt ones, but the blade is in a lot better condition at the same point, I guess, from when I was cutting through the epoxy. So if the decision of which is stronger was up to a hacksaw blade, the epoxy wins this one. I'm just taking a bit of emery paper for each piece. These are the surfaces where I cut through on both. So just to take any obvious sort of differences in height or burrs off, just rubbed it on the emery paper. What I noticed was this clogged up the emery paper almost immediately with the fine powder. So, yeah, that's the surface there I'm going to be working with. I know that the underside of mine is going to be all let's say, yeah, pockmarked with where the sugar was, so it's not going to be smooth. But if I'm going to put these on a hard concrete surface and belt them with a hammer, we don't want any sort of obvious sort of large ridges or bits sticking out of it, because it might sort of seesaw on that and change the results. So they've both got a relatively flat surface now underneath. So I've got a relatively nice flat concrete surface here. Put them both down on their cut sides on the ground, and let's give them a whack with the hammer. So we'll just start light, yeah, and square. Nothing. Yeah, nothing. I think there's a bit of a sharper whack, but yeah, no damage there. Let's keep going. Nothing much happening to that. A few little imprints on it, but nothing much. Oh, there we go. It's got a sharp whack, and it's broken. But that was a hell of a whack, and it's a sharp fracture. Once again, I think it can partly be this is a much larger piece, so if it's not perfectly flat on the bottom, it's going to have that seesaw effect. But it actually, yeah, broke later than I thought. I thought that it would have broken a bit earlier, but anyway, still got some pieces here to play with. So maybe that piece is similar in size to that piece. Let's just see. Keep belting. Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's shattering here like almost like glass, but it's not soft. Yeah, these are hard pieces. Yeah, they're more like a glass material maybe. So, but hell, that's strong, and that type of brake, I'm much sort of happier with that than maybe a flexing brake and a sort of a soft brake. So nice sharp edges everywhere. So yeah, interesting. Oh, shattering to pieces, but you notice that it's not squishing down. So this, it's not getting thinner. The aluminium is actually deforming flatter. It's getting rolled around edges on it. So it's sort of more malleable, let's say. That's the word, I think. That's, the aluminium's more malleable than this. But I don't know whether either of those properties make it better or worse. But yeah, we'll say that maybe the aluminium's stronger in this case. It hasn't actually broken. As I said, it's probably more flexible or malleable. But yeah, it definitely took a hell of a lot of force to break this material. Now we'll take the chisel. Now I think I know what's going to happen here. I'm just going to put a big dent in the aluminium, and it's going to break this in half. But let's just do it. Oh gee. Yeah. So aluminium's got a big dent in it. You know what's going to happen here. It's going to be like a wood splitter. Yeah, bang, now it's damaged my concrete. So yeah, once again, which one's stronger? I don't know. I mean, that's obviously softer. So I'd say, yeah, aluminium's softer, this is harder, this is more brittle, that's more malleable. Yeah, you make up your own mind maybe who wins that. Maybe it's fair to say the aluminium wins it because it didn't actually break, but yeah, I don't know that any of those forces quite like that are going to exist inside the engine. So after that little test, I think it's fair to maybe come and have a look again at how the epoxy is inside the block here. And it's quite a different scenario, because unlike that where the surface under here isn't perfectly matching the surface of the concrete, so it can rock a little bit. So as I hit it with the hammer, all the force of the hammer is being exerted on like one point or one line along here. And so, you know, you've got to multiply all the pounds per square inch on this side is all being multiplied through a single point or line on this side, which in the case of the block here, that's not the case, because it's actually set into the aluminium. So it's perfectly matching the form of the aluminium all the way around. The surface area in contact with the aluminium is the maximum. It's perfectly formed in there. So if there's a force in the cylinder, maybe a knock event or something like that, that's pushing on the side of the cylinder, it's going to spread all that force out across all of the area that it's touching. And as long as it doesn't bulge up or out, like it doesn't compress, then really it's done its job. And as long as it doesn't shatter and break up into pieces. So enough people have used this epoxy and pulled their engines down, and it's not all cracked and broken. So we know it doesn't crack and break. What we don't know is whether it compresses. So if it's, let's say, like a rubber material in there and it can compress, then it's not going to serve any purpose. But I think you can see from the force it took with the hammer to break it and the way it's broken that this didn't compress at all. Me hitting it with a hammer, I don't know if we had a special camera and we could measure how much it actually deformed, it didn't deform at all, it just broke. And so that's probably the main characteristic that you're looking for, is that it's not compressible. And so I'm confident in that case that it's going to work as good or better than aluminium in this case. The aluminium is softer and more malleable. I actually suspect that's more likely to, let's say, bend or deform than this stuff. And as long as if you opened your block up after a year or two and there was no cracks in it, then you can have confidence that this is probably doing a better job than aluminium. And the next test here, I'm pretty confident we're not going to have a problem. So confident I'm using my wife's good cooking pan. So we've got this heating up. Let's put it in there and heat it up. Heat it up with the water. So that's still cold. See, finger in there. that's heating up. We'll get that boiling, and we'll let it boil for a while, and we'll see whether anything happens to the epoxy or the aluminium. I made myself a coffee and come back, and it's absolutely boiling away. I did add a bit of extra water because I was concerned it was going to boil down. So I've literally just walked back in. There's all these like specks of stuff happening. Oh, sorry, a bit of steam on the screen, but specks of stuff happening out there spraying up. I think it might have been a bit of dust on it, but let's wait and see. That is well and truly boiling away. Oh, hang on, what a temperature gauge here, let's see. 103.9 Celsius, so water boils at 100 Celsius for those with the imperial system. So this water is, well, definitely boiling. So yeah, bubbles should prove that, but let's leave it while I drink my coffee for a few minutes, and then we'll start poking and prodding. I've topped up the water again. It's been boiling a while, topped it up, but this piece here, and what I'm going to do is cleaned off any real loose bits on it. Got a set of scales here, so let's zero them. These are my reloading scales, so they're very accurate. Let's go to grams. Yeah, they're accurate to 0.01 of a gram. Let's drop that in there. So that piece is 4.87, 4.88 grams. I'll just check that again. 4.88 grams. Okay, so 4.88 grams. It's going to go now in the hot water, and we'll boil that away for a while. I'm going to maybe try and let this boil. I have to keep topping the water up a little bit at a time, but I'm going to boil this for, let's say, at least 10 or 20 minutes, and we'll see if the weight of the sample piece changes, which would indicate that it's dissolving in the water. I really don't think it is. But there is this residue forming around the edge, and I suspect that was just dusty bits left on there that have come off and have bubbled up there. But just to be sure, we'll put that piece in there, we'll boil it for a while, and we'll see if it weighs any less after a while. Okay, the total boiling time now I think is approaching about 40 minutes. The smaller piece has, since we weighed it, has been in there for 20 minutes. So it's been 20 minutes since we weighed the smaller piece. Actually see how much the level has dropped. It's pretty much, it's only just covering the larger piece there. So I'm going to take this smaller piece out. I'm just going to sit it down here to dry. It's going to be hot. And interestingly, there's a piece I haven't put in the water, and it's actually changed the colour of it. So it's like a 1980s hypercolour t-shirt. So yeah, interesting. It'll be interesting if we break one of these pieces open to see if that colour change has happened all the way through, or if it's just on the surface, or whether the colour changes back after some time, after it cools down. Anyway, we'll let that dry off, and then we'll weigh it. The smaller piece here it's cooled down a bit. It's still warm. It's dry. So it hasn't gone back to the bright blue, at least not yet. But let's weigh it. Let's make sure we get this just right. .88 grams, exactly the same. Let's just check it again. .88. So it hasn't lost any weight. It hasn't dissolved in the water. Okay, it's been over 40 minutes now. The water's sort of basically almost started boiling down below this. So this is still hot. Let's give it a test. So straight down the ground. You can see the steam still coming off of it. Just grab the hammer and let's start giving it a few whacks. It doesn't. can hear that it's solid. It's not rubbery, even though it's hot. It's not rubbery. There's a few little bits fracturing off, but it hasn't gone like a rubbery or deforming at all when I'm hitting it with the hammer. It still feels exactly as hard as it did before. I'm going to really whack it now. It's going to break. Right, it's going to defy me. Oh man, okay. Let's try again. Okay. All right, maybe it gets stronger when it gets hotter. Jeez. Okay, there we go, finally. All right, so let's just grab that blue piece. So there's the blue piece. Oh, the light's not so good. Let's try and pick that up. Let's have a look here. So there's the blue piece that didn't get boiled. Yeah, so this is now changed colour all the way through. Interestingly, so something's happened there. But as you can see, the way I was hitting it, I'd actually say now, for some reason, it actually seemed tougher. This is still very, very hot, but you can see it hasn't deformed at all. It's not like a different texture, a rubbery sort of texture, which means that back up here on our engine block, if we're worried about movement here and this actually like deforming, then yeah, I really don't think that's going to happen with this. So yeah, that hasn't, boiling it hasn't changed the strength of it. I'll let it cool down. We'll hit it a bit when it's cooler, but yeah, it's just interesting that it's changed colour and changed colour all the way through. So yeah, to be fair, I should. Also, I think we all know what's going to happen. Let's knock this up the same way that we had it earlier. Let's give this a bit of a belt with a hammer. Oh, it's hot. Yeah, it's actually seems like it's deforming easier now than it was before, and I know as metals get hotter, it's easier, they become more malleable, but I wouldn't have thought 100 degrees would make such a difference, but that's actually, I can really see or feel the impact marks where the hammer was hitting it. So this is actually deforming, you know, quite a bit. Oh, it's hot. Actually deforming more now, I reckon, than it was before. So yeah, with that in mind, I really don't think this, so far from what I've seen, there's no bad properties to this that make it any worse than the aluminium. If anything, maybe it's actually better. And as for that, let's just turn that off. As for that residue, yeah, this stuff here, it's just, oh, just make a mess here. That residue is just like, yeah, very thin. I think it's just from when I cut this with a hacksaw, it had sort of that powder all over it. I think basically now it's just had a wash, and that's what's left around the edge. So I've got my piece that changed colour and my original piece that hasn't. This piece has cooled down to room temperature. It's still this colour, but I'm just really curious now. So chuck it in the freezer there and let's see if it changes. Time to check on it. There's my original piece. It's about 10 or 15 minutes later. No, still changed to that light green. It's very cold, so obviously that's the colour now it's going to stay. So, fire test. So this piece here is the bit that just come out of the freezer a minute or two ago. Still cold to touch. So let's apply some fire to that one. The reason is we're going to heat it up real quick and see whether maybe it shatters or something like that. Now obviously your engine's not going to get up to operating temperature quickly, but it's a property I guess we want to test, is to make sure that a sudden heat change doesn't cause that to fracture or break. And we'll keep applying the heat and let's see what happens to it. Maybe it melts, maybe it catches on fire, maybe nothing. Cue fire. And it's pretty much caught on fire very, very quickly. Keep the flame on it. The sun's coming out at the same time. So, it's caught on fire, very smoky. Let's see how soft it is, whether it's soft. No. Hit it. Just want to see like whether it's melting. Oh yeah, well its form has definitely changed. You see now it's changed colour again. That's interesting. Yeah, definitely perhaps softer and more brittle. Sorry, not more brittle, but yeah, softer. It's sort of, yeah, interesting. Yeah, as I hit that, I can feel it. Just doesn't feel like it's got the tensile strength it used to. So I think the whole piece has been damaged. But mind you, that got very, very hot. So just moved outside. I was going to set fire to the bigger piece here. But really, flames like that and that intense heat so quickly is not something that's going to experience inside of the coolant gallery. If there's flames in the coolant gallery, I've got a bigger problem. So I've got another idea of how we can test this at maybe in a more controlled way and get it up to a higher temperature. So we've tested 100 degrees Celsius. Let's try and get it up to maybe 150 or something like that. So I've literally just turned the oven on and we set it to 150 degrees Celsius there. We're going to go in and we're going to heat it up slowly as if it was inside the engine. This will heat up over 5 or 10 minutes and we'll maybe leave it in there for 20 minutes or so, half an hour, then pull it out, hit it with the hammer, see whether it's changed. So 150 degrees Celsius I believe is going to be higher than any temperature it's going to experience in the position it is in the coolant gallery. So let's see how it goes. It's been there a little while, so quick look here, and surface temperature is at 150. Okay, there we go. It's been 20 minutes in the oven at 150. Just check it. Come on. Camera there. It's not getting a very good reading. Go 150. Show you again. 137. Anyway, it's cooling down. Let's hit it with the hammer. Okay, it's definitely, oh shit, that's hot. Okay, it's definitely not as solid as it was before, so I can feel it deforming with the hammer a little bit as I hit it, but it's not breaking. It's still quite hard, but maybe it is. There you go, as you can see there, it's maybe just a let's get another piece. So I hit these side by side so maybe you can sense. So that's the sort of sound of that one. It's been in the oven, changed colour even further. And you hear that. It's like a solid whack. So yeah, that's the bit that hasn't been in the oven, and here's the bit that has. So it's definitely got a little bit more deformation to it. It sort of feels like maybe a very, very dense polyurethane. So, and definitely softer than the aluminium. Yeah, not quite sure what to make of that. It's at 150 degrees though, remember, so and that's a temperature that I really don't think it's going to see. So yeah, I'm tempted. I've still got this other piece here. Tempted to maybe go and put that in and try this again at 120 or 130 degrees Celsius, and see whether it's any different. Turn temperature down there to 120, so that should be closer to what we might expect this to have to withstand. So there's our other piece, chuck it in there and let it heat up to 120, and then we'll let it go another further 20 minutes like the other one at least, and then we'll do the same test. So it's just been in there a few minutes, but what I'm finding is that I had the door open for a minute now or 30 seconds. It's actually very hot. The what it's sitting on, that's pointing at the block itself. It was currently reading about 130 when I first opened the oven, so it's already getting hotter than maybe it should. I'm going to rearrange things a little bit here. A bit happier with that. So that pan was getting up to 150 degrees Celsius, even though the oven here is set to 120. We'll come down a little bit for a bit, and I'll set it there and we'll see what temperature it gets to. It's interesting that the aluminium sheet underneath was getting hotter than what the oven was set to. So as a reference, we're going to chuck this piece of aluminium in there and we'll measure its temperature or monitor its temperature as well as the other piece. So 113. Okay, so it's been 25 minutes there at 120. Now, finding that this is actually reading higher as it shoots through the hot air. I'll pull that out of there a bit, hold it above. Yeah, I'm getting a 106. Try and hold it there. Let's get below 120, 140, 136. Anyway, confident it's been heated up enough, so while it's hot, take it outside and start heating it. Here we go, here's our hot piece, still hot. Yeah, so it's still got a small amount of deformation, but once again, I think it's a bit hotter. Oops, a bit hotter than anticipated. So, yeah. Yeah. Sort of, it's like one of the hardest polyurethanes I'll probably come across. There is a slight deformation. Would it be enough? Yeah. It's definitely more than what aluminium would bring, but you can see it is still able to shatter there, or at least a little bit. Yeah, let's get the temperature gauge. Now having doubts about the integrity of this, but yeah, there's a reading. I'm getting some very erratic readings, but 107, 105, 35, 90, 107, 103, 100. Yeah, I'd say it's just over 100. I'm not going to touch it and tell you, but yeah, let's just put it aside for a minute and grab this one, which this is the one that, this isn't hot, this is the one that we cooked earlier up to 150 degrees Celsius. And it's actually come back hard now. I can feel it's hard like a rock. Hear that? And it's, yeah, a bit of a different sound. This is definitely harder. Yeah. Maybe you hear the difference. Saw a bit shoot off there, so this is back to being hard and brittle, and still got that distinctive colour change. There's our original blue piece that hasn't changed, but yeah, there we go. So my thoughts are, I'm still happy that I've done it, because I wasn't going to close the deck at all. So I'm happier that this is in there than nothing at all. It really comes down to the matter of, you know, is the temperature going to exceed 100, you know, much over 100? So you saw we boiled that in water, and that definitely is going to be consistent at 100 degrees Celsius, and it was still hard as a rock. It changed colour, but it was rock hard. When we put it under flame, we get a very intense heat that really it's not going to experience that type of intensity. And it set fire and changed its composition a bit, and it definitely didn't have the right properties that we need. Putting it in the oven, I thought would be consistent, but now I wonder if maybe it's not so consistent. I did see very wildly fluctuating temperatures, even up as high as 150 degrees when I had it set to 120. So maybe it was hotter than what it said in the oven there. But even now, as it's cooled down a little bit, it's still quite hot. But that's the cold one. Just making sure now, because now they both sound the same when I hit them. So I'd say as well, it doesn't. Yeah, I can hold on to that now. It's still quite warm, but it doesn't conduct the heat as much. If that was a block of aluminium, that'd still be very, very hot. So it's not conducting heat maybe as well as aluminium, I would suspect. It's my gut feeling, which means that's a property that I guess you do want, is conducting the heat away. But yeah, would it? I'm pretty happy that we boiled it at 103 degrees Celsius and it was still fine. To me, it's really not going to experience much more than that. And I'd be more worried, I'd be more thinking that the oven environment was less consistent. And so, yeah, but interestingly, it did definitely change colour. Again, further in that oven process. But after cooling now, it's gone back to its same hard, brittle self. Just for the colour's sake, that was the original piece that hasn't been heated. That got the hot water treatment. And then these pieces got the oven treatment. So its colour has definitely, changed as it's been heated, but these still feel the same as the blue one. You thought this was over, and so did I, but had another idea. So this time I got the power hacksaw out, and I've cut off another piece from our unmolested sample. Some boiling hot water and the pressure cooker. Okay, so the pressure cooker's getting itself set up here, and we've got it on the canning option, because apparently canning option gives us 116 degrees Celsius. So there it is there. So that should definitely, and inside the pressure cooker, properly reflect what's going on inside the engine. Almost halfway there, 11 minutes to go. Alright, there it is. The pressure cooker's still all pressurised up. It's just finished. I've brought it out here to the garage. I'm going to carefully evacuate the steam. Alright, there it is. Alright, the ultimate test. Oh, here we go, that's still hard. Oh wow. I do think I just saw a spark fly off it. I can't even break it, but it's definitely hasn't got that rubbery sort of character that it had before. Yeah, let's see if I can break it on this edge. No. So my conclusion, the 116 degrees Celsius pressure cooker is probably the closest you're going to get to the conditions this is going to experience inside the cooling system of the engine. So the fact that it has passed that and it held its integrity is still there. It didn't soften at all. It's still very hard. I'm confident that this material is suitable for the application of a closed deck on an N54 engine. Just to prove that the pressure cooker did its job, these are the different shades of the pieces that were exposed to different conditions. So all of these, we're looking at a face or an edge of it that was broken after it was exposed to its treatment. So as a fair comparison, I guess. So we started with the really deep blue of the epoxy that had only been exposed to room temperature. We went to sort of an emerald green with the 100 degrees Celsius, the pot of boiling water for 40 minutes. And then we've gone to this other shades of green here, and these are actually very similar, slightly lighter on the oven sample than the pressure cooker sample. But I think it shows that the pressure cooker was doing more than just boiling water because it took it closer to the colour and shade that we saw in the oven. And therefore, maybe the differences that we saw between the oven sample and the pressure cooker sample are more related to the method of heating than the actual temperature. And I'd like to think that the pressure cooker is much better reflecting what would be happening inside of the coolant galleries of the engine as opposed to the oven. Now I've created a new members section, and in there I'll be posting a video on the things you need to know if you're considering whether or not closing the deck on your N54. It'll also include some hints and tips on how to use the epoxy product. Thanks for watching.